I'm going to be discussing and philosophizing on these engaging emotions of interest and taking interest in things. And I want to discuss a related emotion, enthusing experiences and our enthusing emotions, which come from our interests. You see, when we look in our surroundings and something captivates us, or we just find ourselves just like immersed in something, there's a potential there to tap into something that really energizes us and that expands our interests in terms of learning. We engage in learning that's direct, whether we're conscious of it or not, and we seek out more information, and we tend to become also more curious. We might ask questions or view things in different ways, but as we're doing this, especially as if the experience is enthusing, what ends up happening is that there's also a lot of energy going on, and we get excited and we start to metabolize more resources in our body that's consuming all these fuel sources, heating us up, getting us ready to get out there and engage in what we're interested in and the material, and to allocate those resources to be able to get more from that experience, get more in terms of the information, the psychological information, or whatever might be that we find particularly captivating or interesting, or even just positive in terms of its affect, that feel-good sensation that we tend to want to explore alongside that information, which is paired and which is hard to separate out when we're talking about interests. So it's not like we're just, say when you're interested, it's not like you're just doing it because it feels good, or there's a quality of what it likes to feel good, but there's a quality of more perplexity, and there's a quality of direct engagement in these gaps within our perceptions and knowledge that are opening up and introducing novel or distinctive aspects of information that we integrate within our minds and our bodies through these direct instinctive instantiations that are predicated within learning, and which directly involve and require these engaging emotions. Enthusiasm tends to be a form of highly energizing, positive emotion, while something that's enthusing is more related to that interest domain that has aspects of that high energy metabolism that you might get from enthusiasm, that tends to be related to things like creativity and a large creative output, while enthusing experiences pertain more to interests and direct forms of innovation that are focused on particular interests, and connecting those interests and deepening our interests is an immersive experience where enthusiasm can apply more to this general or specific level of category, and they're relatively the same and similar, but there's different constituencies in how they both relate to interest, which is one of these intellectual emotions, and it can pertain to either our imaginative consciousness or even the cerebral aspects of our psyche in relation to our intellect, and it tends to be deeply bound to this knowledge process and in regards to exploring what's true and it's all its entailments, and more broadly in regards to the physicality of the psychological mind and what can be directly known through it rather than just inferred, because in this case we're talking about our own subjectively truly known experiences. And because we're talking about that, and we're talking about the physicalities directly to our sensory perceptions, but also in our surrounds, in which, say, we're looking at something and something captivates our visual interest, and we start to get absorbed and we're looking at it and our eyes open up and we might start to blur out things in our surroundings, and we're like, what is that? You start to get even space in our heads, and then new ideas start to pop up in there, and we start to connect these ideas and maybe try to explain why it's doing that, or ask questions that lead us to these different ideas, or even sometimes some amusing and funny thoughts that aren't necessarily in that moment directly relevant or may not apply, but they help to characterize it and grasp its contents, that allow us to form these associativities throughout our nervous system in concordance with what's going on in our consciousness experience in relation to consciousness objects, things, and materials that are instantiating new meanings and particularly psychological information within these protein chemical compounding structures throughout our body, and which are direct to the transduction that's occurring within our neurons, and in releasing acetylcholine, which is responsible for neurotransmission in relation to adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is important for the mitochondria, which is what supplies fuel and energy sources, and largely leads to this regulation of epigenetic changes that operate alongside acetylcholine, and is highly important for that learning plasticity, perception-dependent learning plasticity, and these direct transformations in the body that are involved neuroplasticity, and the rewiring and development and growth and maintenance, as well as the downregulation of inflammation, but the coding of new structures and expansion of neurons, the insulation of the myelin sheath, which involves improving the conductivity and the processing of information between neurons, but also the increase in size of the cell body of those neurons that expand as we're interested and engaged in this learning process, and those metabolites are being consumed and helping to restructure and fuel, but also simultaneously support those neurons as we're immersed in these experiences. And that's why when you feel interested, you might notice these subtle or even robust changes in our physiological response in relation to what's going on in our minds. We can sometimes, from a state where we're tired and we're not doing too much, but we haven't really thought too much, enter a state in which a qualia will enter our experience and captivate us. And next thing we know, once we take interest, we're suddenly full of energy, and our eyes might open up, we might even start to sweat a little bit. And this is all associated with that energizing emotion that comes from being enthused, and enthused from our interests that involve a lot of hormones that are being released in the body that are associated with optimal learning and optimal learning experiences that are direct to a healthy, functional, psychological mind, and being able to not just maintain that healthy, functional mind, but engage in this optimization process that starts with our immediate interests and that feeling of enthusing interest and enthusing emotions that really do engage us in the direct physicalities of our existence.